Hi, everybody. I had the opportunity to speak today to Michael Schellenberger, who's, he was a Democrat at one point, like so many people, and has turned more to the, I wouldn't say conservative side exactly. He's turned to whatever this new emergent side is that's signified by the union, let's say, of Trump and Musk and J.D. Vance and Mehmet Oz and Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, et cetera, whatever that is. And I've had Michael on as a guest a couple of times on the show. He's a journalist. He broke the Twitter files. Elon Musk gave him access to the Twitter back end to delineate what had been occurring before Musk purchased the platform. And Michael was also instrumental in breaking the WPATH files. And WPATH is, you could call it an organization, but it's more like a cabal of perversion and incompetence, I would say. And WPATH put themselves forward as a scientific consultation group that established gender-affirming care as the standard of care, a standard that was immediately adopted by the lackeys and bootlickers at the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association, etc., ad nauseum forever. And so Michael's a pretty useful journalist, and he's been assessing Elon Musk's work at Doge, deconstructing U.S. aid, for example. And I wanted to talk to Michael about his views on Musk's efforts, on Musk himself, let's say, on this strange collaboration between Musk and Trump and the other people that we mentioned, and about, I suppose, his deeper insights, if any, and likely, on just exactly how to understand what's going on, how to understand this rise of new conservative or new traditionalist populism, how to understand the threat that's being posed to Europe in terms of mass migration and the globalist utopians, how to understand the philosophical and spiritual basis of this revolution in governance that we see manifesting itself before us, to understand the role that technological transformation is playing, for example, in facilitating Elon Musk's ability to do his sleuthing and uncovering work. Well, it's all part of the attempt to get to the bottom of things, and the bottom's a long way down, and so it's down the rabbit hole we go with Michael Schellenberger. Well, Michael, it's good to see you again. It's been about 10 months since we spoke, so it seems like a lot longer ago than that, but I guess that's because, the world keeps turning upside down and spinning, so it's disconcerting. I'm very curious. We're going to talk a fair bit about U.S. aid today and government corruption, fraud, waste, which are hard to disentangle. And I want to dive right into that. But I'm also curious what else you think is particularly germane that we might touch on today.
Well, I mean, look, Jordan, I think it's a huge moment. We obviously had a massively historic election that also signified a change in the media environment, of which you've been a really fundamental part. I think we saw today Vice President J.D. Vance gave a major speech at the Munich Security Summit in Munich, Germany, where he very strongly articulated what I think you could argue is the new national conservative case, which included grave concerns around losing Europe to mass migration. It included a strong defense of free speech. And this is now the second time that I think he has intimated, this time I think he was softer than the first time, that Europe's move towards totalitarianism, particularly this mass censorship that they want to impose on our social media companies and on us, on our voice in Europe, that was not only unacceptable, but that it puts our alliance in danger. I mean, he specifically said it puts NATO in danger. So I think the Europeans today got a sense of the depth of which America cares about free speech, that free speech for us is a must-have, not a nice-to-have. In Europe, it feels like it may be more like a nice-to-have. And I think you finally got an administration that's just saying, hey, we're not going to tolerate this censorship and totalitarianism that you're imposing on our companies and attempting to impose on our people.
Yeah, okay, well, let's address that right away. Did he meet with Scholz, or did he keep him on the sidelines?
That is a good question. I am not sure. He did. I believe he did say at the beginning of the speech that they had met, but I don't. Some people, the audience should check on that. It was a second strong. He actually gave a prior speech as well that was also strong. But yeah, this was a big speech. He, of course, there was an assault, by a terrorist in Germany, I believe, less than 48 hours ago. Very dramatic moment. I don't have the latest in terms of deaths and injuries, but it was, he opens with that. He expressed his, of course, great concern and sympathy for the Germans, and then pivoted right away to saying, look, you've got a big mass migration problem, and we have it too, and we've got to get control of our countries. And I think he also said, and I think he really spoke for Americans this way, certainly for me, which is that we actually really love Europe. Like, Americans really care about Europe, like not just as a tourist destination. We care about it as an idea, as the birthplace of the Enlightenment. I mean, for us Americans, Europe is where our ideas that our country was founded on were born, but they were never fully realized until you got to the United States and until you had Thomas Jefferson insist against Alexander Hamilton that we were going to have a Bill of Rights, and that the first thing was going to be free speech, and that we weren't going to mess around about it, that this was number one, that we didn't want to have a country without having this guarantee. And like I said, I don't think Europeans understand the depth of our commitment to that really when they start threatening our free speech rights, as they've been increasingly doing, they need to know that they are threatening their security. That it really makes, we're tired. America is tired. Like, we're very, very tired. It's upsetting to go 20 years of hearing stories of veterans, almost all of whom appear to have PTSD in some way, the combat ones, the struggles they have. I mean, I was with a veteran who lost friends in Afghanistan the day that Biden pulled out, which was a disgrace. So America is tired. We love Europe. We believe in Europe, but they're testing our patience. And I think we finally have an administration that can communicate the depth of our concern around their push towards censorship. And they pioneered it. They developed it. A lot of it was, we've certainly done our part to bring it there, but, they are Western Europe is currently the greatest threat to free speech in the West. And, I think they need to understand that that's a big problem when it comes to U.S.-European relations.
Yeah, well, we should differentiate this a bit too. I spent a lot of time traveling in Europe in recent years, and I've made it a point in all of the countries I visited, and that's most European countries, East and West, to meet with thought leaders, politicians, journalists, actors, in all the countries that I've gone to, at dinners and lunches. And, I've come to a number of realizations as a consequence. The first is very much akin to what you're describing, which is, what the hell's going on in France and Germany and the UK, the Netherlands, Western Europe, let's say, Western Europe. That's a consequence, in my opinion, fundamentally of Brussels, the European Union, the pernicious effect of Davos, the globalist utopians, the apocalypse mongers, the people who tell you that the future's a miserable and wretched place unless you give us all the power. But that's not Europe. That's Western Europe. Now, the Eastern Europeans, they're a different bunch, and, well, we could walk through them to some degree. Let's start with Hungary, because that's a country that's been absolutely pilloried by the legacy media in the press, in the Western press. And, that Orban has been described as, shoulder to shoulder with, of course, Adolf Hitler, because, he's the guy you drag out when you don't have anything else to say. And I've been to Hungary a number of times, and Hungary has a very sophisticated family policy, pro-family policy, and it's been quite effective. They've knocked their abortion rate down 38% with no increase in policing, so to speak, right? It's part of a cultural shift. They've knocked their divorce rate down substantively. They've increased the proportion of women who are participating in the workforce at the same time. They've slowed the decline in the birth rate. And my experience in Budapest, in particular, where I got to know the Hungarian president. That's not Orbán, the previous president. And she was the author of the Hungarian, or one of the authors of the Hungarian pro-family policies. I also saw Budapest rebuilding itself. The goal of the Orbán administration is to make Budapest into the most beautiful city in Europe. And, you know, they have some real geographic advantages there. It's built along a river and it's very beautiful already. And then Poland has a thriving economy. They don't have an immigration issue. And the Eastern Europeans are incredibly dedicated supporters of the Western tradition and the U.S. in particular, not least because they remember what it was like to spend 75 years under the thumb of the Soviet totalitarians. So even the left-wingers in Eastern Europe aren't completely out of their minds, you know, like they are in Germany in particular, right? So it would be useful for and maybe this is already happening, but it would be useful for the Trump administration people to differentiate between the Western Europeans, the Eastern, you know, the European Union types, the globalists, the WEF, and the Eastern Europeans who are, like I thought the last few times that I went through Europe, that the salvation of Europe would be Eastern Europe, surprisingly enough. Like, who would have ever guessed that was going to be the case? So, and the free speech issue, thing is, you know, we still don't understand free speech properly because, you know, you said that if the Europeans keep undermining free speech, and that battle's being played out in the virtual world, particularly with regards likely to X, say, more than anything else, that their security is going to be undermined. And you were thinking about them compromising their relationship with the U.S. But what's necessary to understand is that you do undermine your security by interfering with free speech, because there's no difference between free speech and creative and corrective thought. Those are the same thing. And so any culture that clamps down on the right to free speech, which isn't just another hedonistic privilege, they literally interfere with the mechanism that keeps their country honest and innovative. So it's a disaster.
That's right. Well, of course, it's happening at a moment when I think Europe is started to at least comprehend just how behind it is on technology. The speech that J.D. Vance gave a couple of days ago was on AI, at least ostensibly on AI, and how the framing that the Trump administration wants is of AI as possibility, as potential, as innovation, not as apocalypse, repression, you know, the sort of the European approach to try to gain control over the technology.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, so look, you know, America is, I mean, sounds so corny, but I mean, America's back in just a big way. I mean, you've just got a character there in the White House they are moving faster than anybody. I mean, I was just there talking to folks, you know, various places, and everybody's surprised at how fast they're moving. And of course, Elon has accelerated that, the number of things that are happening. The thing that we were ostensibly going to talk about today, for example, we don't have to go to it right away, but just the whole reason there's a debate in the United States right now about the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is simply because Elon was seeking to basically gain access to the computer systems, the servers, the buildings themselves that these agencies occupy. And that was the agency that wouldn't give them access. It wouldn't give them clearance. So that was when, you know, they just shut it down. They just were like, if we can't he's the democratically elected president of the United States who has full authority, according to Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, over every single executive branch agency, and that includes Agency for International Development, when they are refusing access to the representative of the president of the United States, who happens to be our greatest technologist, they just were like, fine, if you're going to play that, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And the stupid prize they got was that they got shut down, including pulling back all of their people. And I only mention it to say what you're seeing them bringing into government, which none of us could have imagined, is first of all, this awareness that you can't really reform institutions. When people talk about that, but really you have to just shut them down and build something fresh. That's the only way you can get the old guard out, and you have to have new leadership and a new constitution or a new set of rules. But also that you don't really know what's going on until you move fast and break things. And this is something, that I experienced too, which is like, you just have to go out there and sort of do things in the world to figure out what is the federal government. You sort of think what the federal government is because we have lists of agencies and employees and whatever, but we saw with the U.S. Agency for International Development, we didn't know what they were doing. And what we discovered is that they were part of the blowback of U.S. counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, counterpopulism that was pushed abroad with the Arab Spring and then the color revolutions in Eastern Europe and came back. And that those characters that led the censorship, disinformation, lawfare, and other dirty tricks that they used for regime change abroad brought those tactics and strategies to the United States and weaponized them against Trump, MAGA, Republicans. And again, you play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and that's what they got. And so when they broke open AID, suddenly it was available for all of us to see. And there's been some very good research and scholarship by some of our allies on what was going on there and making sense of it. And so we've been in a process of sense making as a country for about whatever it's been, a week and a half, about what exactly is this agency doing? How did it become so deranged that it would use the weapons of regime change against our own democratically elected president from 2016 to 2020, including, many of us suspect but can't yet prove in January 6th? How did that happen? And then the subsequent question is, what do we do now? I mean, Jordan, after we've spent billions of dollars creating this elaborate foreign policy establishment, otherwise known as the Blob, which includes many academic journals, academic divisions of universities, whole think tanks, parts of the federal government, nobody has theorized what comes now. Nobody has theorized what happens if the United States shuts down its main agency for soft power. That's what USAID was, Agency for International Development. It was just a mechanism of soft power alongside the CIA. It was really supposed to be, State Department, AID, CIA, all supposed to be run by the National Security Council, all supposed to be run by the President of the United States. What happens when that's not there anymore? And I think there's some real questions. I mean, I'm fairly anti-interventionist, anti-imperialist, have been really for all my adult life. But there's a real vacuum that does get created. The critics of what they've done are not wrong in being concerned about, well, what happens when Russia and China move into those places? And maybe that's fine. I mean, let the Chinese get involved in trying to build nations in Africa. But I do think it raises some existential questions about what is the United States? What is the United States in the world? Because we are entering, as you mentioned, 75 to 80 years of Pax Americana, where the United States has been holding together a global system. And people talk about multipolarity, but China and Russia are not the United States. I mean, we are still the center of action. We have all the talent, we have the AI, we have all the energy. We remain the most secure country in the world, not just because of our nuclear weapons and military, but also because we're protected on both coastlines by huge bodies of water. So, I mean, the United States is still arguably the big superpower. Obviously, China's a superpower, but it's not playing anything. You can't even imagine China playing anything close to the role that the United States played after World War II. So we're in a moment of, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. I think everybody's trying to figure out what's going on, and much less we've got to spend some time figuring out what do we want the United States to be. And J.D. Vance and Trump are further along in that thinking than anybody. But honestly, it's not like there's a consensus even within the Republican Party about what the United States' role in the world should be in this post-Pax Americana, post-Cold War period.
Did you know that Andre Bocelli, Steph Curry, Justin Bieber, and Tim Tebow share something remarkable? Each of their mothers faced pressure to end their pregnancies, yet chose life. When women experience unplanned pregnancies, they often find themselves at a crossroads, wanting to make the right decision while facing societal pressure. This is where Preborn makes a difference. Their network of clinics provides a compassionate care and essential support for women considering their options, including free ultrasounds. It's incredible how hearing a baby's heartbeat can transform a mother's perspective. Women who see their ultrasound are twice as likely to choose life for their child. If you believe in supporting women through difficult decisions and protecting unborn lives, consider partnering with Preborn. Your contribution directly helps empower women with the resources they need. Just $28 funds one ultrasound, and $140 can help 5 mothers choose life for their babies. Monthly donors receive updates with stories and photos showing the impact of their generosity. To make a difference today, dial pound 250 and say baby, or visit preborn.com/Jordan. Again, just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or visit preborn.com/Jordan. Together, we can support mothers and transform families and futures.
Okay, well, let's take a bunch of that apart. Well, the first thing is, I was talking with some people well-placed in the administration recently who are convinced that Musk has the possibility of finding like $1 trillion worth of waste and fraud in the next 4 weeks. Now, we should just outline what's happened. Like, I've watched the Democrats respond to Musk's group of teenage engineers with contempt, and this is so 1960s, this mode of thinking, because Musk doesn't have 15, 20, 100 teenage engineers. He has, let's say, 20 to 100 teenage engineers with the most computing power that the world has ever seen at their fingertips, and they know how to use it. And there are some seriously smart computer engineers. I was just at a lab in Palo Alto that's doing things that are so science fiction like you can't even imagine it. And, they're inventing revolutionary machines as a byproduct of the revolution in technology that they're pursuing. And and all this is augmented by AI, and Musk is on top of that. And so he's really inserted the 21st century into the 19th century in DC. And of course, people don't know what hit them because no one knows what's hitting any of us. And his ability to insert himself into these hidden systems is absolutely revolutionary. It's a mythological trope, an ancient mythological trope, that it's the evil brother of the rightful king who is one of the prime enemies of the state. It's the evil brother of the righteous king, and it's the goddess of chaos. Those are the two enemies. It's the social structure pathologized or the natural world rebelling. Right, so historic enemies. Well, the evil brother of the king is camouflage and corruption. And what happens as a system develops is that it accretes predators and parasites. That's a biological metaphor. And if the load gets too heavy, the system collapses. And the antidote to that, the Egyptians had figured this out, the ancient Egyptians. The antidote to that was clear, honest speech and careful attention. The Egyptians actually had a god who signified that. That was Horus, and he was the defeater, the eternal enemy of the evil king. And Musk is playing that role with his engineers. He's in there finding out, how much of government spending is wasted. Well, you don't know. Why do you not know? Well, because the government itself doesn't even have the internal mechanisms to track its own behavior. I'll give you an example of this. So I worked for social services as a consultant in Alberta 40 years ago. And oddly enough, I was hired as a junior consultant. I had demonstrated a certain amount of competence in my summer internship, and I was hired to duplicate a audit of the social services department that had been commissioned by a major auditing house. I think it was Price Waterhouse. And they had charged the government a fortune for that the year before. And the assistant deputy minister asked me to update it, which was a pretty weird request. But I thought, well, what the hell? I'll give it a shot. And so I went through the audit, kind of line by line, and then called the relevant people who were involved to get a financial update so that it was current. And the first thing I found out was the government had no idea where it was spending its money, and all the numbers were estimates that could have been off by a factor of 10. So, and the clincher for me was, the punchline was that social services literally had no idea what proportion of the money they spent went to the end recipients. So old people, welfare recipients, etc., because it's the social safety net branch of the Alberta government. They had no idea. And of course, you know that the typical charity spends 90% of its money running itself. That's if it's well run. And I was reading a book at that time by a man named John Gall. It's a great book. It's a cult classic called System Antics, trying to make sense of this. It's a great title, System Antics. Very smart. And one of his maxims, his axioms was, the name of the system is not what the system does. And so his analytical approach to the analysis of a system was, don't assume that anyone knows what it does. That's the first thing you have to find out. Now, that's what Musk is doing. It's called USAID, and that's its camouflage, you might say. It's like, we're out there making the world safe and productive for the desperately poor. Well, no one can oppose that. Well, but then the questioning starts. Which poor people? How much money? And how? And the answer to all those questions is something like, we don't know, or we don't want you to know. Right. And then, well, hasn't there also been revelations that the Treasury Department had a policy to not question its invoices?
Right.
I mean, you couldn't imagine a more insane policy, right?
Right.
That's it. What that means is that if you set up a shell company, what it appears to mean is that if you set up a shell company and you sent professional looking invoices to the federal government, that they would pay them without question forever, no matter how much they cost, just so you wouldn't complain. So, okay, so Musk is in there. Musk is in there with this incredibly sophisticated technology, rapidly tracking down spending. So the first question is like, what the hell are these agencies actually doing? And it's not like anyone knows, not thoroughly. Then the next question, of course, is how much of it is waste? Okay, so the management literature indicates management and literature on productivity and creativity. There's two indications from that literature that are germane. The first is that 65% of managers in private companies add negative net value to their companies.
Wow.
Okay, that's in
sense.
Profitable, well-run private companies, right? 65%. Okay, and then you might ask, well, how can a company survive? And the answer to that is the square root of the number of people engaged in a given domain of effort do half the work. So if you have 10,000 employees, 100 of them do half the work. And so that means that Musk can do what he did with Twitter, let's say, and fire 85% of the people. And all that happens is profit margins go up and everything runs more efficiently. And so will Elon find $1 trillion worth of waste in the next 4 weeks? It's like, I guess we'll see. And then what? Well, then that brings the question that you raised. It's like, well, now we have to rethink this from first principles. And like my sense, you tell me what you think about this. I know this woman named Magatte Wade, and Magatte's quite the interesting character, very charismatic, entrepreneurially oriented African, and a very fierce advocate of free markets. And her belief, and many people believe this, is that foreign aid is actually counterproductive to the countries in question for like 50 different reasons, partly because it's not that easy to help people. And it's a lot easier to do harm with stupid money than good. It's harder to do good with money than it is to invest it wisely. I mean, and those are kind of the same thing. So you could just make a case that the whole idea of foreign aid is based on a 17th century model that presumes that we have to stop the world's incompetent people from starving. And like, we're just not there anymore. The only reason that people ever starve in the world now is for political reasons. There's plenty of everything to go around. So what's the point of foreign aid, and how should it be distributed, if it should be distributed at all? And then, so, and you asked what'll be the new role of the United States. Example, that would be good. Forthright defender of free speech and the free market. At ARC, you're going to ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Our answer to this, because I think it's an answer to the question you posed, is that we need a rethinking on a more conscious level of the principles that have made the West free and productive. And we need to reorient ourselves in alignment with those principles. And that's mostly a cultural endeavor rather than a political endeavor. So, right. Well, okay, that's an information dump. And so I'm curious about your take on it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I think to start with, we hear a lot waste, fraud, and abuse as though they're kind of all equal. Waste is inevitable to any system. You try to reduce it, but one of the things we find is that you can waste more energy trying to reduce waste. It's often why when you go to these studies of like buildings and whatever, there's a high level of energy efficiency. You can always get more efficiency out of a building. And they always go, well, if we put more energy and time into reducing the efficiency, yeah, but then you wouldn't be running your business anymore, right? So there's like, you can waste time trying to deal with the waste. Then there's fraud. That's bad. That shows not just a kind of, I think people tend to think of fraud like, oh, well, the police haven't done a good enough job or the police are corrupted. It represents a weakening and corruption of the body, of the system, that you're actually, as you said before, it's not, there's always parasites, there's always viruses. When the host becomes vulnerable and weakened and old and prone to disease is when you're prone to fraud. And then you get the worst of them all by far, which is abuse, which is abuse of power. And we are coming out of a period of extreme abuse of powers. I mean, we can debate the period of time that's relevant. I think the last 12 years, we should think of it as a woke reign of terror, meaning a period of great fear. Certainly universities, media, wokeism. I mean, it starts with Black Lives Matter, ends with the election of President Trump in 2024. That was a period of abuse of power. Every single major institution, medical power, educational power, media power, political power. And what gets revealed when Elon and Trump break open the U.S. government is we see this agency that was always there in their peripheral vision. Everybody sort of knew about, but you kind of forgot about, USAID, Agency for International Development. And what opens up is a bunch of, things that you had forgotten but are important to remember. The first is that human economic development, prosperity, growth comes from within. It comes from the core values of within, namely delayed gratification, hard work, saving on principle, waiting to get married until you can afford your own home and sustain your own family, which means, healthy sublimation. That those things are the recipe. Integration,
not sublimation.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's an important distinction, and I've been thinking about this a lot, because like you could think of sublimation as self-control, and you could think about it as a variant of the Freudian superego that inhibits, but there's a power dynamic presumption there, which is that the way that you obtain control over your own impulses is by using something akin to force. And that's not a good metaphor, because what someone who's successful on the sex and aggression side has done is integrate those. They've subdued them. They've put them in their place, and they've become an integral part of their personality, but they're not ruling, right? So someone who's integrated his shadow, so to speak, isn't someone who's castrated and weak. It's someone who's fully capable of being aggressive at the drop of a hat, but doesn't, or devotes it towards stalwart defense of the perimeter, let's say. And with regard to sexuality, well, here's a funny statistic that I think is just so hilarious that it's emblematic of the times. The people who have the most sex are religious married couples. Now, but that just says everything, doesn't it?
Right.
Because the promise of the sexual revolution was hedonistic, narcissistic, extended adolescence at best, was that if we just got rid of the Freudian superego and all the power-mad censors, let's say, and prudes, everybody would be having sex all the time with everyone, and wouldn't the world be wonderful? And the truth of the matter is that sex is a lot more fragile than anyone thought, and there's a lot of ways to destroy it and very few ways to foster its development. And it turns out that long-term committed monogamous marriages are the answer to that, and also the answer that sustains civilization itself, because it's also predicated on this sophisticated integration towards a future end. And there's something else you pointed to that's of unbelievably critical importance, and people don't understand this at all, although Adam Smith understood it. No, we have this idea that one of the main sources of our wealth is natural resource. And I don't even like the concept of natural resource. I think it's a disguised form of Marxist presumption that wealth is just laying around for the taking, and that some people get to the wealth first and that's how they get rich. It's like Japan doesn't have any natural resources and it's rich. And there's also a phenomena that you know about, I imagine, called the resource curse, which is the repeated empirical observation that there's, if anything, a slight negative correlation between national prosperity and the presence of natural resources. Well, why? Well, easy money corrupts. That's one reason. But there's a deeper reason. The deeper reason is the only natural resource is trust. And trust is dependent on honesty. And the reason that trust is the only natural resource is because if I can take you at your word, we can cooperate. And I don't have to worry about the snakes in your head. All I have to know is you'll do what you said you'll do. That means we can make a contract. Not only that, we can make one that we'll both understand it and we'll both keep it. And that means that we can cooperate. And if everyone's like that, then everyone can cooperate or even compete fairly. And if everyone can cooperate and compete, then every desert can bloom. And Japan is a great example of that. And so, Venezuela and Argentina, great counterexamples.
The Congo. Yeah, I think that picture that you're describing is the same one that Harvey Mansfield lays out in his wonderful book, Manliness, where he has 3 levels of masculinity. The first is weak men who are incapable of defending themselves and others. Manly men who are strong men who look down on the weak men, but will also abuse their power. And then the gentleman who has the power of the manly man, but keeps it in reserve to protect his family, his bride, his children, his family, his nation, civilization, but he's not going to abuse his power. So we've seen a regression where civilization was created by gentlemen, as you said. They became gentlemen. In the process of creating civilization, they become gentlemen, or in the process of becoming gentlemen, they create civilization, which is to say a society based on universal rules, on the view of humans as all equal under first God and then equal under the law, and that everybody has these fundamental inalienable human rights. This is the basis of what we call Western civilization, and it's a civilization of gentlemen. Well, we've seen a mass derangement, over the last 12 years, but particularly with the election of Trump, you saw a derangement occurring in every institution. And what happens with USAID is, and within the intelligence communities and the foreign policy establishment, is a massive derangement and abuse of power where the gentlemen stop being gentlemen, they become aggressive manly men, and they decide that they know what's best. And they can't stand all this democracy, which they call they dismiss as populism, and they describe populism as its opposite. They project onto populism totalitarianism, and in the name of preventing totalitarianism, create a censorship industrial complex, which was already we know was international. U.S., UK, U.S., Brazil, U.S., Europe, Canada involved in it, particularly the Five Eyes, all coming out of the intelligence community because they're the ones that had run the censorship and disinformation operations, again, in Arab Spring and then the color revolutions. They turn all that back on the United States, first with the Russiagate conspiracy theory, this idea that Trump is secretly controlled through a sex blackmail operation by Putin. Second, through the dismissal of COVID origins. Then you see it with the Hunter Biden laptop, an elaborate conspiracy theory that the laptop is a Russian information operation as opposed to which they knew it was not because the FBI had the laptop 7 months earlier and used basically Jedi mind trick brainwashing to pre-bunk or program the journalists and the social media companies into thinking that a future story about Hunter Biden and Burisma would be a Russian hack and leak operation, and spreading disinformation in advance, programming people, and then demanding censorship on the basis of it. And I think we're going to find out a lot more about January 6th as well as a kind of construction rather than something organic. A clear decision was made at a minimum to not provide adequate security. We know that for sure because the Capitol Police Chief has written a whole book on it. And so you look at that series of events, and you also look at what the U.S. security state had done in places like Brazil and the Philippines and other parts of the world. And of course, this goes back decades. And it's a clear counter-populist effort run by these deep state organizations, run by people who had lost their minds, who have all the rational abilities, but they had Trump derangement syndrome and turned their enormous powers, their incredible psychological, sociological, political, technological powers against their own people to undermine democracy and attack free speech.
Success in business isn't just about offering an amazing product or service, though that's certainly essential. What truly sets thriving companies apart is having powerful, reliable tools working behind the scenes to streamline every aspect of the selling process. These are the systems that turn the complex challenge of reaching customers and processing sales into something that feels effortless and natural. That's exactly where Shopify enters the picture, transforming the way businesses operate in the digital age. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're home to the #1 checkout on the planet. And here's the game changer. With Shop Pay, they're boosting conversions up to 50%. That means fewer abandoned carts and more sales going to your bottom line. In today's world, your business needs to be everywhere your customers are, whether that's scrolling through social media, shopping online, or walking into a physical store. Shopify powers it all, seamlessly connecting your business across the web, your store, customer feeds, and everywhere in between. And here's the truth. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Join over 2 million entrepreneurs who have already discovered the power of unified commerce with Shopify's all-in-one platform. Upgrade your business to the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Head to shopify.com/JBP to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/JBP.
Okay, so let's go back to the first part of that declamation. You talked about weak men and strong men. And so I want to just put a little twist
and gentlemen.
Yeah, gentlemen. Yes.
There's three levels.
I want to put a twist on that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at what constitutes weak. All right. So if you look at the way that human beings develop neurobiologically, what you see is that from birth to the age of 3, human beings are basically, you could conceptualize them as, you could conceptualize the baby and the toddler as a sequence of instinctive drives. Now, drive isn't exactly a good metaphor because these systems aren't deterministic. They're more like personalities than they are like drives. But you come into the world with a set of motivations intact and a set of emotions operative. And so the motivations are orientations of aim, let's say towards physical contact, towards play, towards physical gratification towards hunger, thirst, temperature regulation, the basic subsystems that orient you so that you don't collapse physically, let's say. And the emotional systems are basically positive emotion that attracts you to things and negative emotion that freezes you or causes you to retreat. Now, an immature person who is a weak person, let's say, because we're going to equate those, an immature person is someone who's still dominated by those systems. And so a 2-year-old moves from the domination of one motivational system to another. And it isn't till they're about 3 that they can start to integrate with other people. That's when they start to learn to play. Okay, so now the reason I'm saying that is because we can associate that weakness that you described. Weak and immature are the same. And they're the same as hedonistic. And they're the same as present-oriented. And they're the same as unable to delay gratification. And they're the same as narcissistic and narrowly self-centered. That's all the same. And like a variant of that would be criminal as well. Okay, now, one way of controlling that is with power. And that's the strong men that you're describing. Literally, the strong man. The strong man is someone who controls the hedonists with an iron fist. And then if you look at the postmodernists, the postmodern neo-Marxists, they would say that's the whole playing field. There's just power. There's just hedonism. There's nothing else. But that gentleman that you described, that's that integration that we were talking about earlier. That's civilized integration. And it is the basis of, it's the basis of mental health, I believe, which is quite a radical claim. Like, you cannot, and I think you see this, for example, in the data that show that liberal, progressive young women who are like fragmented and hedonistic and immature, they're rife with mental illness, depression, and anxiety. They're dominated by negative emotion and have very little hope. And it's because they're not integrated. And so what the men that you described as gentlemen are actually integrated and mature. And their ethos isn't weak hedonism or power. Their ethos, this is something I really want to develop at ARC, and in the next book I'm writing, their ethos is one of voluntary self-sacrifice. Right? And that it's voluntary. So the voluntary sacrifice is present to future. Right? So you sacrifice the present to the future. That's control of delay of gratification. And you satisfy and you sacrifice your subjugation to your own whims to communal stability and productivity. Right? And that's what happens. Kids start to learn to do that at the age of 3 when they develop friendships. They learn to delay gratification. They learn to take turns and to have friends, which is very much akin to delaying gratification. And that's voluntary self-sacrifice. That is the foundation of civilization. And that's central to the Christian ethos, for example, and it's laid out in the Old Testament writings as well, the ethos of sacrifice, let's say. And so I think we're at the point where we can actually understand this. And my sense is that a return to first principles is going to involve a conscious understanding this time of the ethos on which our civilization is founded. And I'm curious about your ideas about that. See, because I can't see how it can be any other way. Like, to be civilized means to be social, reciprocal, right? And to be social means you're not selfish. But then you might ask, well, what does selfish means? Well, it means you're not governed by your immediate whims. Well, then what are you governed by? You're governed by an impulse to integrate yourself internally with the future and with other people. And that's deeply enough embedded in human beings, so I don't think there's any difference between that and the instinct to develop and mature. And that's part of that hero's journey path, right? That's the pathway to maturation that produces that gentlemanly behavior upon which civilization is founded. And I can't see, how would you argue against that? Like, you could do what Foucault does and say, well, there's nothing but power. It's like, well, Foucault believed that because he wanted to rape little boys in graveyards and have that be okay. You know, I mean, he thought of power as the ultimate deity because he was trying to justify his own pathology. And there's plenty of that on the progressive and hedonistic side of the conceptual world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is why I was so excited to talk to you, Jordan, because I think, well, we talked last time also about narcissism and nihilism. And I think since it's almost been a year and we've been working on our book still on that gets at these issues, I think we have a better picture of what's happened. And first of all, when you have your liberal democratic civilization with respect for human dignity and human equality and free speech threatened, you get more grounded. I mean, I was concerned around the ways in which the most civilized people, the elites, have been undermining civilization since really my first and second book, both on the environment and on homelessness, undermining, for example, the security of a city, making cities dangerous again. We just saw in Los Angeles, I've been writing about defunding the police for years. We just learned in Los Angeles that they had been defunding the fire department. That's how far the degradation of civilization had gone. And I knew as soon as it happened that there would be voices right away who would say that there was nothing that could have been done about it because humans were doomed by climate change. How could we possibly protect ourselves from fire? I mean, who could ever imagine there being fires in the most fiery part of the United States, right? Like, I mean, it's insane. So, but I think we have a better picture now, Jordan, too, where, you get this really precious, just this tiny moment of this thing we call the Enlightenment. Of course, it comes out of 1,500 years of Christianity, but we get this period really 17th century, 18th century, really, 18th century, where there have been all these wars and everyone's, Hobbes and everybody's tired of them. And they're like, we have to have order. You have to have civilization. And Locke comes in and amends that and says, you also have to protect the citizenry from each other. But you have still a picture of what it means to be a citizen, right? And it is tied to this idea of being a gentleman. And we're also trying to teach this at University of Austin. But it's a picture that a citizen, it's not just something, yes, you're a citizen by fact of being born in that nation, yes, but there's this older idea of the citizen, which came from older Europe, which was that to be a citizen was something that was a privilege and an honor, and it came with some intense responsibilities. And you're in service, so you sort of say, what is it? The gentleman is in service of civilization, of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, of reproduction, of continuing the civilization, there's a picture of an evolution of human consciousness, as we've talked about before, that, gets into trouble when the stories that Christians had told start to get challenged, by Copernicus, Galileo, Darwin. We get to the crisis of meaning. We get to nihilism, the death of...
I think you can make a case, and I think this is the appropriate case, and I think it can easily be documented historically and mythologically that when the integrating ethos collapses, that's equivalent to the death of God. And the reason for that, specifically in the West, is because, well, here's a way of thinking about it. There's no doubt that the Passion of Christ is a archetypal representation of voluntary self-sacrifice. I don't think that would come as a shock to anyone to say that. But when you understand that the ethos of voluntary self-sacrifice is the antidote to power and hedonism, then that takes on a new light, because then you might say, well, what happens if you kill God, so to speak, in the Nietzschean sense? And at least in the Christian West, what that means is you remove from the central place the insistence that the drama of self-sacrifice is the altar of the divine, let's say. And that has cascading consequences. Now, you outlined to some degree the Enlightenment reasons for that. It's like part of what's happened is that the rational mind did a very bad job of distinguishing mythological and narrative reality from objective reality, right? They're not they're not simply the same. Sam Harris racked himself up on those shoals to some degree. You know, one of the admirable things about Sam Harris is that Sam became convinced very early of the reality of evil. And his response to that, being a rationalist and scientifically minded, was that we would have to ground our morality in objective fact. And that's almost right. Like, it's almost right, because we do need a transcendental grounding for our morality. But it's not to be found exactly where Sam was looking. And I think there are complex technical reasons for that. But the consequence of the rise of the Enlightenment, and this is something that, you know, this is the time that people like Steven Pinker, too, identify as the birthplace of the modern state. They think of that reaction of rationality against the superstitions of the underlying religious ethos as the moment he knew that was going to happen. Like, he knew that. He laid that out very, very clearly, and so did Dostoevsky. And it certainly did all prey to the nihilistic hedonists starting in the 1960s, and they're in a power dynamic dance anyways with the... Because if you're a hedonist, you have to use power, eh? And the reason for that is that if I'm a hedonist and it's all about me, why the hell would you associate with me? Because if it's all about me, it's certainly not about you. And that means that to gratify myself in the moment, I have to use force. And so there's this, you see this dynamic, by the way, extremely brilliantly portrayed in the movie Cabaret, right? It shows the degeneration of the Weimar state into this gender fluid hedonism. And all the while, the same party, what would you say? The same people possessed by the spirit of Dionysius are just inviting the Nazis in because they want the heavy-handed fist of authority to impose some order. Right. So then the question is, well, what's the alternative to that, right? And the postmodernists, the neo-Marxists say, well, there's nothing but power. But that's not true. That's not true. It's deeply not true. That mature, integrated ethos that you identified, let's say, with the students that you want to produce at the University of Austin, that's our aim at Peterson Academy as well. You know, so, yeah, and at Ralston.
Are you ready for a fresh start after the holiday indulgence? Make 2025 your healthiest year yet with Balance of Nature. Those Christmas cookies and holiday feasts were great, but now your body's craving something different. That's where Balance of Nature comes in, the perfect way to reset your health this new year. Getting your daily fruits and vegetables has never been easier. Balance of Nature takes fresh produce, freeze dries it to preserve nutrients, and delivers it in a convenient capsule you can take anywhere. No additives, no fillers, no synthetics or added sugar, just pure fruits and vegetables in every capsule. It's that simple. Are you ready to transform your health in 2025? For a limited time, use promo code Jordan to get 35% off your first order, plus receive a free fiber and spice supplement. Head over to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Jordan for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Jordan for 35% off. Balance of Nature, promo code Jordan for 35% off your first preferred order, plus a free bottle of fiber and spice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there was this forgetting, there was a hubris that we didn't need these thousands of years of inherited virtues and values. The hedonism manifests it's the feeling of power is the sort of the ultimate hedonistic thrill. And as you said, it's empty, and it's also completely free of all of the wisdom of these past traditions. I mean, every wisdom tradition, I think by definition, has in it that lesson of the line between good and evil runs through the hearts of all men. You know, be careful when fighting with monsters that you not become one. You see the speck in your neighbor's eye.
Beware of the attractions of power.
Right. Mm-hmm. There's always the true wisdom traditions are always emphasizing our mortality, warning of hubris, emphasizing humility and honesty and these really simple basic virtues. And yes, do they change over time? Of course, but yet they also mean the same thing. That all gets forgotten, and so you get this kind of secular post-Cold War establishment. And that, I mean, just exactly what it sounds like. Media, university, foreign policy, intelligence community. Because remember, the intelligence community is full of very intelligent people, and they're the children of light. Just exactly what Reinhold Niebuhr warned against in his famous lectures from the 1940s, that liberals imagine they're children of light. They can do no harm. We're just going to go into these countries and help them. Just going to go in there and help them. Then we're going to help them decide who to get elected. And you got married to some of the darker forces, which was the CIA, and starting to try to control who gets elected in Italy and then in Greece. And you go all the the U.S. foreign policy and being trying to this huge moral victory. We then have 9/11 and a kind of, an early sense of moral righteousness, and then it descends into the horrors of Iraq. And then, frankly, we went and overthrew a bunch of governments in the Middle East, surreptitiously, Eastern Europe, and it was a maniacal, I think it was just a power trip, as we would say. These guys are getting off on their power. And so that when Trump gets elected, they just couldn't allow a nationalist and populist to just rule. They just couldn't allow it. They had to invent this elaborate story about how he was Hitler and it was fascism and there was going to be, this was just like, it was insane. There was no evidence to support any of it. It was a complete projection of their own totalitarian fantasies on Trump. And it's just out of Shakespeare. It's out of Greek tragedy, Jordan, where of course, I think everybody on the right in the United States right now is secretly, they won't say it, but they're secretly happy that Trump lost in 2020 because he comes into much more power now than he would have had in 2020, capable of eliminating, basically our most important, intelligence cutout, our most important, covert, overt, regime
hopefully
change
much
agency.
more authority and more authority and wisdom,
and with
rather
the moral,
than power,
and with the moral authority,
and
that
maybe
comes
some
from popular
humility.
vote. Yeah, and hope. Let's hope. We'll hope.
Well, it kind of looks like it to me. It doesn't look to me like the new version of Trump is the same man we had 8 years ago. There's a hardness about his gaze, first of all, like that. What would you say? I don't want to call it clowny. There was an element of Trump that was huckstery, and that's a deep tradition in the U.S. Well, and like Colonel, was it Tom Parker, the guy who ran Elvis? The huckster salesman is a pretty deep American archetype, and there was a fair bit of that that was part of the drama of Trump. But he's got a seriousness of intent that wasn't there before that I think you get from being tried in the fire. And then, I was concerned about his narcissism because Trump is very extroverted and he's very disagreeable. And those are the predictors of narcissism as pathology. Not everybody who's extroverted and disagreeable is narcissistic, but that's the tilt. But, I've watched him share the stage, for example, with Elon Musk. And if he was genuinely narcissistic, he would be jealous of Musk. He wouldn't share the stage with him. Because, you might say, well, if you're a narcissist and you're president, that's good enough. But that just means you don't know anything about the clinical world, because nothing is enough for a narcissist. There's no filling that hole, because it's all about them. And that's, the more you make it all about you, the deeper the hole. And yet Musk, Trump he pulled in Kennedy, and Kennedy and Musk, I would say, and Tulsi, but even of those three, Kennedy and Musk were probably the only people in the United States who could really give Trump a run for his money in terms of implicit fame and influence. And yet he invited them along and they agreed to play. And so far it seems to be working. And, J.D. Vance is also an interesting choice because Vance is smart and competent and dynamic. And he's not the sort of weak vice president that
we're used to.
A narcissist would be attracted to.
That's right.
And so,
yep. No, look, it's an incredible story. It's an incredible story arc. I just don't think Trump really believed in God until he almost died from a bullet. All of which remains mysterious, unsolved. You have maybe the greatest innovator in American history, working to reform government. You have these incredible story arcs with Tulsi and Bobby coming from the left, even the radical left, really, if you're being honest, coming to this place which, to kind of even get that story arc of our villains in this story, the characters who have been abusing power in the ways that we've been looking at. These are people who forgot what America was. I mean, the United States has been very reluctant to do foreign entanglements. I mean, the rise of the media industrial complex, of the kind of mass media complex, it's so recent. It's 100 years old in the United States. It sort of gets created by U.S. elites in order to persuade young men to go fight in World War I. That was when we really start with government propaganda. By the time you get after, World War II, of course, it just goes on steroids. You get out after World War II, but the media is very controlled after World War II, all the way through the rise of social media. But you have the people running those foreign policy institutions, Jordan. I mean the whole foreign policy establishment, just think big, the elites, let's just say all of them. They forgot what America was about. They forgot that, literally free speech is number one, literally and figuratively. You don't mess with that. That is the third rail of American life. If you start to step on someone else's free speech rights in the United States, this is a country that defends it's as far as I can tell, I can't find another country that allows Nazis to march in neighborhoods of Holocaust survivors. That is U.S. law from Supreme Court, from the Brandenburg decision in the 1960s, reinforced in the Skokie decision. That's how seriously we take that. These guys went and messed with the First Amendment. They then went and tried to incarcerate their political opponent, making up just phony thing after phony thing about him misstating, him misdescribing the payment to the porn star, and that was somehow 5 felonies, or that somehow he had some papers. Even though he's the only person that can declassify, that can sort of declassify documents right away, somehow he took some papers to his house and it merited an FBI raid on the house of a former president. These are bonkers behaviors. You look at them in retrospect, that is a kind of madness. These are people that forgot what the United States was, and they had got conditioned to thinking that their power, they thought that they were the United States. They thought that in their narcissism and their nihilism and power, but they forgot that, you just go back to that period of 1776, the founders of our country were hardcore. They were hardcore in their demand for democracy and free speech. Our establishment forgot it. They turned on their own people. They became swept up in their power, their narcissism, their elitism, their nihilism. And I love this. I'm in a great mood. This is, by the way, I also want to say, we're headed to ARC. We have seen the complete destruction of the World Economic Forum. It has no legitimacy. It's embarrassing for world leaders to go there. It's run by a cartoon character villain, a character who's literally in Joe Rogan's toilet. You go to do a Joe Rogan podcast, he's in the toilet. That's how seriously, in the pop culture mind, he is a ridiculous villain. World Economic Forum, because I know you founded ARC in part, I'm sure you had a lot of motivations, but it's certainly in part as a counterweight to world. You're not the counterweight. ARC is not the counterweight anymore. ARC is the main event for intellectual life in the West, oriented around a continuation and first of all, a celebration of human specialness, a continuation of Western civilization as the best and only way to help all humans achieve their internal potential. It's this, for me, what a year for ARC. And it's a moment to I think you look back, it's not January, but you need the Janus face. You look back, you look forward. We're clearly entering a new era. And it's not totally clear what it is at all. And look at what we've got on our table. We're coming to a new era. It's a new media ecosystem. You get elected in different ways. It's social media and podcasting. You have to be able to sit. In 1960, you had to be able to be handsome on television. That's what the television revolution was about. The podcasting revolution is you must be able to sit for 3 hours with Joe Rogan and answer questions. And if you are unable to do that, as Kamala Harris was, you can't be president. Okay, so you've got to have some intellectual fortitude and stamina. And then we've got this massive technological question in front of us in terms of AI. We have 2 wars that are about to be wound down, need to be wound down. Big questions around NATO. existential questions around our commitment to NATO. So I can't think of a kind of, more important. I mean, I think it was prescient to set up ARC. I think ARC has so much gravity as a center for this. It is the twilight. It's not even the twilight of the idols. We are in we are 0 dark 30 of the idols. And I think we're coming to daybreak. A new dawn is coming, but it's still very dark.
We're morally obliged to presume that the future is a welcoming and abundant place. That's a moral obligation. Once you're not naive and you've passed through the valley of nihilism, your moral obligation is to sustain your faith in the future. There's no difference between that and faith in civilization. There's no difference between that and faith in the spirit of life itself, right? And we should also point out, too, that commitment to free speech, if you cease to interpret freedom of speech as a hedonistic freedom, which is the freedom to say what you want for your own purposes, you can see it as a reflection of the particularly Christian insistence, although not only Christian insistence, that the word is the divine mechanism by which the cosmos itself is sustained. And at minimum, there's something deeply psychologically true about that, is that we cast our selves and our families and our societies, we cast them into being, especially the being that's good, with truthful, forthright, honest, merciful, and just speech. And you can't touch that, because that is the dynamic principle that keeps the land of promise alive. And so understanding the metaphysical assumptions upon which the freedom of speech is predicated I think it's now crucial. And it is shocking to us at ARC how rapidly things have pivoted. And we're also praying that, we don't fall prey to the same power-mad tendencies that typified the WEF. Now, you see, you talked about the betrayal of the elites. We should delve into that a little bit, because there's a very interesting dynamic going on in the US and in Europe with regards to so-called populism. See, and populism isn't populism. It's rebellion of the sane and grounded, although inarticulate, working class against their elite betters, so to speak, or at least the elites who think they're better. Now, the reason they think they're better is because they worship the intellect, and that's one of the potential dangers of so-called meritocracy. When you go to a place like Harvard, let's say, even when it's functioning, the implicit assumption is now you're among the better people. And the thing is, it's true that you're among the smarter people, but there's no correlation, for example, between IQ and conscientiousness, like zero. The correlation is literally zero. There's no indication at all that intelligence and wisdom or intelligence and morality are the same thing at all. Partly because if you're intelligent, you can do crooked things faster, right? So that's not a moral, there's nothing implicitly moral about that. Now, it's in the interest of the Luciferian intellects to assume that moral superiority, and in fact, that's like the nature of the Luciferian, is to assume moral superiority, but there's a usurping element of it too. And so the problem with the intelligent, let's say, and the self-satisfied simultaneously is the eternal problem of pride. You're blessed by God, at least so to speak, because your IQ is 3 standard deviations above the mean. And instead of being grateful for that and attempting to use it in service, you worship it and presume that you're ordained by the powers that be to rule the world.
Are you tired of being held back by one-size-fits-all healthcare? of having your concerns dismissed or being denied that comprehensive lab work you need to truly understand your health. I want to tell you about Mer Health, the premier health optimization platform that's revolutionizing how we approach wellness and longevity. What sets Mer apart isn't just their cutting-edge diagnostic labs or concierge health coaching, it's their commitment to treating you as an individual. Their expert clinical team stays at the forefront of medical research, creates personalized, evidence-based protocols that evolve with you. Unlike other services that rely on cookie-cutter solutions, Mer Health goes the extra mile. They consider your unique lifestyle, blood work, and goals to craft recommendations that actually work for you, whether that's through lifestyle modifications, supplementation, or prescription treatments. And with a remarkable 4.9 out of 5 rating on Trustpilot, you know you're in great hands. The best part is you can get 10% off your order today. Just head to merrickhealth.com and use code Peterson at checkout. That's merrickhealth.com, code Peterson for 10% off. Stop guessing and start optimizing your health today with Mer Health, because your best life starts with your best health.
And look at where then the revolution comes from. I mean, certainly there's been, I think that you can argue there's been some return to some spirituality. There's been some return to, some appreciation of marriage. But the real revolution is around the nation state and binding us together as a nation. That is what did it, and what is doing it around the world. And nationalism in its modern form, I'll say, there's a debate about how long it goes back, but nationalism in its modern form is fundamentally democratic, because what is nationalism? If I follow Leah Greenfield's definition, nationalism is, a common people, a common citizen bound by a sense of equality, that we're all, you might be rich, I might be poor, you might be smart, I might be dumb, we're all Americans. Or we're all British, and that comes with entailments. There are consequences of your national identity, but it is fundamentally democratic. Once you're a citizen, you have a say, you have a vote. And so what got eroded with the snobbery, the elitism, the hubris, the pride, the arrogance of our elites, and this is out of Toynbee, and this is how civilizations fail. The creative class or the elites in a civilization start to identify with the elites in a different civilization, and also sympathize and want to bring in the working people of another nation. Well, that's exactly what we saw happen in these Western countries, where the allegiances with other elites, mediated by organizations like the World Economic Forum or the United Nations or any one of these elitist organizations. And so you've seen this beautiful populist nationalist backlash to it that says, no, we have thousands of years or hundreds of years of a national tradition that's special, that hands us a set of virtues and values that have sustained us and our families and our societies. And no, it wasn't all oppressive. It wasn't all colonialist or patriarchal or like it was a
power
beautiful,
predicated.
Yeah, it wasn't all just based on might makes right. It was also based on a very strong sense of principles created by gentlemen in a civilized way.
Yes, hence the end of slavery. Yes.
Incredible history of progress.
The way that we've dealt with that at ARC is by turning to the Catholic social doctrine, although it's much older than Catholicism itself, of subsidiarity. And so in the story of Exodus, there's the emergence of civilization as an alternative to the tyranny of the Pharaoh and the slavery of the Hebrews. So imagine tyranny and slavery as two poles. You might say, well, is there an alternative to that? That's the same dichotomy as power and hedonistic immaturity. It's the same thing. Okay, is there an alternative? Well, the alternative that's laid out in the book of Exodus, this is what's revealed to Moses, is subsidiary organization. And so, and with an appropriately organized appropriately organized society, you don't need a tyrant and you're not a slave. But what does it mean? There's you. You're married. You're married with a family. Your family are responsible citizens of your town. Your town is a responsible agent in the running of the state. The state is a responsible agent in relationship to the nation. Like there are levels of responsibility that are, so to speak, external to you, but that also are also define your identity. Your identity isn't something you carry around in your head like the liberal psychoanalysts, let's say, presume, the liberal psychologists for that matter. It's your placement in a functional hierarchy of responsibility. But that's also where you find the meaning of your life. And so the hope of ARC is that we remind people of their subsidiary responsibility. It's like, you don't want a tyrant? You don't want to be a slave. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to take up that responsibility on your own. And that's also the adventure of your life. You need to get married. You need to have some children. Your family has to be an integrated part of your community. You have to serve your state and your nation, and all of that under the divine, all of that under whatever's at the top of the transcendent hierarchy of values. And we pointed to that already. That's at minimum, that's the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. And I believe, and I think this is part of being in this post-Enlightenment age, partly a consequence of being wherever the hell we are now, that we can make all that conscious and really understand it. And then, well, I've watched people, who have made this conscious. I've talked to so many young men who were disoriented or attracted by power, let's say, that kind of toxic masculinity that's exemplified perhaps by Andrew Tate.
Yes.
Instead, they take on their responsibility. They find a woman, they get married, they have children, they start to act in a adventurous and entrepreneurial manner, and they're standing up straight and they're looking forward, and away we bloody well go. And
it's a pride that they've earned. Yeah, it's the pride of the gentleman that they've earned. Andrew Tate's not a gentleman.
I think that's fair to say. And the world isn't power and hedonism. That's a sadly impoverished and spiritually shallow and existentially doomed viewpoint. And we can dispense with it. We're done.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, it is. I think to your point of we now know that the greatest pleasures come from delaying gratification, and that hedonism is actually a poor strategy to gain pleasure, that happiness is something that comes as a side effect in pursuing your bliss, in the words of the great Joseph Campbell, or at least life's purpose, living a meaningful life. And so what got stripped out of this globalist WEF vision was a vision that had just stripped every nation of its core meanings. It had basically not just disregarded, they had all turned on their own incredible traditions as somehow as evil. That these incredible national traditions, and I'm with you on the subsidiarity concept, by the way, I love that. I want the French to be the most French. I love France. I don't want France to be like some universal monoculture, which, by the way, it's so ironic. I mean, it's a whole other story.
We're really wrestling that in Canada. We're really wrestling with that in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that this prodding that the president's doing I hope that the prodding is actually inspiring a healthy response from Canada to say, because I think the question goes to Canada, goes, great, if under the Trudeau vision that Canada is just part of this global monoculture, well, then who cares if you become part of the United States? That's just one step towards becoming part of a global government. I mean, it's a soullessness that got exposed, that creeped in, and you realize our country, like when you get down to what is a nation, it's got a soul, it's got a culture, it's got a set of traditions, it's got a set of values, and they're meaningful, and you give life's meaning, they give something to aspire to, and so to just go and denigrate them as has been done for decades as just slavery and oppression and these singularities of singularity evil, it's all just the modernity and civilization just culminated in the Holocaust and the atomic bomb and climate apocalypse. I just think I think that the great thing that's occurred is, at least in the United States, I think that is now repudiated, and that the left isn't going to Democrats aren't going to find any success there. I think you're going to see a victory by AfD in Germany this month. It won't probably be first, but they're going to make a huge victory. It looks like Nigel Farage's party is coming very strong, certainly in France. So I think we could be seeing and I don't think I think the funny way it's manifesting is that it's very moderate, actually, like this rebalancing. I mean, they can call it radical, but what was radical, the extremist, was what the establishment was pursuing in the name of countering populism, in the name of countering the return of democracy. So, Jordan, I'm filled with a lot of optimism. I mean, just the executive orders. Last time I was here with you, we were dealing with the sterilization and mutilation of children. I mean, that's where things got. The elites got to the point where they said, no, we're going to go ahead and sterilize and mutilate your children. And look, here's a peer-reviewed science article telling you that it's good. I mean, that is how far things went. And to see it snap back in the way that it snapped back, I can't help but be filled with a sense of optimism. I don't think we have a lot of visibility still in terms of what comes next. But I mean, I think what I'm also getting in the conversation is the sense that you do have to have this faith. You do have to affirm human life. You have to say humans are good. There's something special about us on this earth. It's a beautiful earth. There's a lot of wonderful other species, but there's something special about humankind. We have a specific responsibility. Western liberal democratic civilization has been the high point in that. And that really the alternative is just might makes right. It's the Hobbesian world. And we don't want to go, I think, the American people have said, we don't want to go back to that. We don't want to go live in a world where every president gets put into prison by the next president, or where committees of experts decide what the truth is. So for me, it's just, I just kind of look at it and I go, it's a completely open plain now. And, we're not seeing these reactionary totalitarian forces able to even respond to what's been happening.
Well, amen to that. And I guess this will be released after the second Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. We have 4,200 people attending, by the way, so it's maxed out.
Wow.
Yes, 3 times as big as the previous convention. 1,000 people from the general public this time included in the offerings. Last time we did a public talk afterward that had about 12,000 people. So that was our public offering then. It was really good talking to you. And for everybody watching and listening, I'm going to continue this conversation for another 30 minutes on the Daily Wire side. And I think we'll delve there again, return more to the political. I'd like to pick Michael's brain about Musk, for example, because I know Michael knows him to some degree and I know him to some degree, and that gives us a chance to piece things together. But we can talk more about, I'd like to hear more about your thoughts about U.S. aid, for example, especially given that, you did move to the more, it's not the conservative side, it's whatever the hell side Trump and Musk make now, along with J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard and Kennedy. I don't know how to conceptualize that, but I'm also curious about your misgivings and where you see, being a keen observer of the new political developments, where you see the risk for the victors, let's say. And so we'll talk about that on the Daily Wire side. Yep. So everybody who's watching and listening, you can join us there. Thanks a lot, Michael. We'll see you in a couple of days. And thanks to the film crew here.
Yes, we know the cornerstone is Christ alone.